Australia today is a proud, independent country, but a couple hundred years ago things were different. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, European sealers and adventurers made contact with the Australian Aborigines in Tasmania and established beneficial trading relationships, trading things like kangaroos for seals and Europeans' technology. A few years later, however, a trade in Aboriginal women began. Some were loaned to the Europeans to help seal during the hunting season. Others were sold permanently for marriage, both from their tribe and other tribes. Once the Aboriginal women were proved to be a valuable resource, sealers began to raid the coast, taking women and often killing the men. After a few years of this, however, northeastern Tasmania only had 3 women to 75 men, which contributed greatly to the attempted genocide of the Tasmanian Aboriginal population. Around 1810, the Europeans settled in Tasmania, and the two groups began to combat over resources. Eventually, the Europeans began kidnapping Aboriginal children for slave labor. Then, in the late 1820s, diseases like influenza, pneumonia, tuberculosis, and venereal diseases ravaged Tasmania's Aboriginal populations. Also, in the late 1820s, the Aborigines reacted violently to the colonists impeding on their land. The settlers identified the guerrilla warfare and began attempting to drive out the rebels. This resulted in the Black War between 1828 and 1832. The attacks were overwhelming, and at the end of the war, the Aboriginals surrendered. Their population depleted even more. Around the end of the war, a Christian missionary, George Augustus Robinson, brought 51 Aboriginal refugees to a settlement on Flinders Island called the Lagoons. It was, however, exposed to gales and had no land suitable for farming. After the arrival of a rival tribe, Robinson attempted to defuse the conflict by moving that tribe to another island with similar conditions that became known as Wildeboer. In 1833, a year after the first settlement was established, Robinson learned a few more native languages and convinced another 154 Aboriginals to come to Wildeboer. In the years after, most Aboriginals died of disease, malnourishment, and lack of shelter, and due to lack of freedom, the birth rate was also extremely low. In 1847, the Aboriginals of Wildeboer petitioned Queen Victoria for relocation, and within a year, the remaining 47 survivors were shipped to an abandoned orphanage. Although the food and shelter was better there, the station had been abandoned due to unsafe conditions. 29 years later, all the refugees were dead. Today, the dwindling numbers of Aboriginals in Tasmania keep to themselves on preserves similar to those of Native Americans. They may never truly recover from the genocidal horrors committed against them. However, perhaps we can prevent genocides in the future and make sure that this never happens again.